The last entry in Ranger Dale Mercer's log is 11 words long. That's the thing that stays with me. Not what those 11 words say, though we'll get there, but that after 43 days of detailed, methodical entries, sometimes running to 3 or 4 pages, the final one is 11 words, written in capital letters, and then nothing. Dale Mercer was a district ranger with the U.S. Forest Service, assigned to the Snake River district of the Bridger-Teton National Forest in western Wyoming. He'd held that post for 9 years by the fall of 1987. His colleagues described him as methodical, thorough, the kind of man who filed his incident reports the same day, who kept his gear in order, who logged everything: weather conditions, wildlife sightings, trail conditions, visitor contacts, with the consistency of someone who understood that in wilderness this remote, documentation wasn't bureaucracy, it was survival. The Bridger-Teton is the second largest national forest in the contiguous United States. Just under 3.5 million acres of high-altitude terrain across northwest Wyoming, the Wyoming Range, the Gros Ventre Mountains, the northern reach of the Wind River Range. At its northern edge, it shares a boundary with Grand Teton National Park. At certain points in the interior, you can be 100 miles from the nearest paved road. The Snake River District alone covers roughly 1.3 million acres. It is not a place that rewards carelessness. Dale Mercer was not a careless man. In the fall of 1987, he stopped coming back from his patrol routes. I want to be careful about how I frame what I'm about to tell you, because this story exists in a specific kind of uncertainty. What I have access to are accounts from Forest Service employees who worked in that district in the late 1980s and into the 1990s. Passed along the way, these things get passed, informally, over years, at the edge of conversations about other things. There is a document that people refer to as the log. I've never seen a verified copy. What I know is the shape of the story. What I can tell you is what people who are close to it have described. What I can't tell you is what it means. Dale started his fall patrol rotation on September 8, 1987. This was routine. A significant part of a district ranger's job in the off-season was covering trail systems that summer staff had vacated, checking for storm damage, logging any unusual activity, documenting wildlife movement before the first hard freeze. Solo patrols, 3 to 5 days at a stretch, then back to the district office, then out again. Radio check-ins every evening at 1800 hours. The first 3 weeks, everything was normal. His logs from that period read the way you'd expect from a man like Dale. Trail conditions. A section of fence line down near the Gros River. A campfire ring that needed clearing. Weather. One entry, people who saw the log mentioned this one specifically, about a bull elk he watched cross a meadow for almost 20 minutes. He noted the animal's condition, its approximate age, the direction it was heading when it moved back into the timber. That kind of attention. That kind of man. The first indication that something had changed came on October 2nd. If you've been wanting more stories like this one, the kind that take you somewhere specific and don't let go, subscribe. I post every week, and what's coming next has been sitting with me for longer than I'd like to admit. The October 2nd entry noted something Dale described as repeated sound anomalies in the stretch of backcountry between the Bridger Wilderness boundary and the upper section of the Gros River drainage. He was precise about it, the way he was precise about everything. The sounds were percussive. They came in irregular intervals. They did not match any wildlife vocalization he recognized. He'd worked that district for 9 years. He knew what a bugling elk sounded like at distance, what a bear moving through dense timber sounded like, what water moving under early ice sounded like on a cold October night. He investigated. He found nothing. He noted that the sounds had continued for approximately 40 minutes after he stopped moving, and then stopped. He filed it and moved on. 3 days later, October 5th, he logged the sounds again, this time from a different location, roughly 12 miles north of where he'd first heard them, on the other side of a ridge that would have required, by his own estimates noted in the log, somewhere between 4 and 6 hours of travel to cross. He noted this explicitly: the distance, the time differential. The sounds on October 5th began around 1900 hours, full dark at that elevation in early October. He noted that the character of the sounds was identical to what he'd documented on the 2nd. He signed the entry with his initials and the date. Same as always. The next morning, at his 0600 check-in, his supervisor reached him on the radio. Dale reported that everything was fine. He wanted to extend his patrol by 2 days to document some trail degradation in the northern section more thoroughly. His supervisor approved the extension. He said later that Dale sounded exactly like himself, said there was nothing in his voice that was different. That was the last radio contact. When Dale missed his 1800 check-in on October 8th, his supervisor assumed radio interference. Elevation issues in that part of the Bridger-Teton are common and well documented. He logged it and waited. When Dale missed the morning check-in on the 9th, a search was initiated. The search team reached his camp on October 10th. His camp was intact. His pack was there, his food supply, his spare equipment, everything accounted for, organized the way his gear was always organized. His sleeping bag laid out as if he'd just risen from it. His lantern, out of fuel, set carefully on the flat rock he'd been using as a camp table. His radio, tuned to the correct frequency, battery still with charge. No signs of a struggle, no signs of a hurried departure. And his log, open to the last page, on the same flat rock, next to the lantern. What the search and rescue team did not find was Dale Mercer. They searched 11 days. Helicopters covered the major drainages. Ground teams worked outward from the camp in systematic grids. They found no tracks beyond the camp perimeter that matched his boot size. No broken brush or bent vegetation indicating passage in any direction. No evidence that he had moved from that camp in any particular direction, at any particular time. He was never found. His case remains officially open with the Wyoming Division of Criminal Investigation. There were no charges. There was no conclusion. There was only the absence of a man who had been there and then was not. Stick with me. The part that his former colleagues still don't talk about easily is what comes next. Now, the theories. The most straightforward explanation is medical. A cardiac event, a fall, something that happened quickly and outside the camp perimeter in a direction searchers didn't cover with enough density. The Bridger-Teton's backcountry is genuinely unforgiving terrain, and people have died in more accessible wilderness without being located for years. I'm not dismissing this. It's a real possibility, and the absence of evidence for anything else is itself a kind of evidence. The second explanation, the one favored by some of the people who worked alongside him, is that the sound anomalies he documented had a rational source he was trying to identify, that he followed something into terrain, he misjudged, and that the combination of darkness, elevation, and a single navigational error is what took him. This would account for why no tracks left camp clearly. If he departed at night, following something he heard rather than a trail, he wouldn't have been moving on any established route. The third explanation is quieter. Some of the Forest Service employees who heard this story in the years after. And it did circulate in that particular way that things circulate in communities where people share a professional relationship with specific land, pointed to the pattern in Dale's log. The escalating documentation, the methodical tracking of something he couldn't identify. The note on October 5th, where he explicitly calculated the distance between the two sound incidents and found it physically impossible to reconcile with any single source moving through that terrain on a natural timeline. They pointed to the fact that a man who noted the antler condition of a bull elk from 200 yards was, in the final weeks of his life, documenting something he couldn't categorize, something that seemed to be moving with awareness of his location. And they pointed to what the log actually said at the end. 11 words, capital letters, written in the same careful hand as every other entry. I've heard the text of that final entry described twice. Once by a retired Forest Service employee who said he'd seen a photocopy at a district-level meeting in the early 1990s. Once by someone who worked with Dale's supervisor and heard it described firsthand. Both times, the same 11 words. Let me read them to you slowly, because I think the exact language matters. It is not doing anything, it is only watching. Do not. That's where the log ends. A man who completed his thoughts, who dated every entry, who signed his initials at the bottom of every page. Mid-sentence, or maybe it isn't a sentence at all. Maybe do not is complete. What I keep returning to, the clause I haven't been able to put down since I first heard this account, is the middle one. Not the first, which tells you something is present. not the last, which tells you he made a decision about how to respond. The middle one, it is only watching. That's a man who has been observing something long enough to reach a conclusion about its behavior. That's someone writing down what he is determined to be true. Because that's what he does, that's who he is. And in whatever moment that was, at that camp, in that October dark, he is still the ranger who logs everything, who finds the precise word, who needs the record to be accurate. It is only watching. And then the sentence doesn't finish. The Bridger-Teton is still open. People hike the Snake River district every summer. Rangers still work those patrol routes. In the decades since the fall of 1987, no similar incidents have been officially documented in that area. And I want to be clear about that. This is one account, one disappearance, in a wilderness where people go missing, and the explanations are almost always ones we understand. Almost always. What I want you to sit with, and I genuinely want to hear your answer in the comments, is this. Of those 11 words, which part is the one you can't let go of? For me, it's that modifier, only. It is only watching, that qualifier in the handwriting of a man who chose his words carefully. Whatever he was looking at in those last minutes at camp, he had reached a specific determination about its intentions. He needed to document that. He needed the record to say it. The question is whether that made what came next better or worse. Tell me in the comments. I read all of them. And if this is the kind of story you want more of, researched, specific, the kind that gives you something to carry, subscribe. New episode every week. I don't repeat myself. Next time, we're going somewhere in the American Northeast. 3 separate county maps from 3 different decades show the same road differently. Nobody has been able to explain why the versions don't match, or what's at the end of the road that 2 of them don't show at all.